I never thought I'd be capable of buying a nursing home just to teach my children a lesson. But then again, I never thought my children would place me in one and walk away without a backward glance. My name is Ruth Holloway, and at 78 years old, I've learned that even grandmothers have their breaking points. This is my story of abandonment, awakening, and a very special kind of rebellion that changed everything. It began on a Tuesday morning in April. I was in my garden tending to the rose bushes I'd nurtured for 30 years when I heard car doors slamming in my driveway. Looking up, I saw my 3 children approaching. David, my eldest at 55, a successful corporate attorney, Amanda, 52, who ran her own marketing firm, and Melissa, my youngest at 48, a pediatrician with a thriving practice. They walked in unison, their faces set with identical expressions of determination that immediately sent a chill down my spine. I'd raised these children as a single mother after their father left us for his secretary. I'd worked double shifts at the hospital as a nurse to put them through college. I'd been their cheerleader, their confidant, their rock, but the people walking toward me now seemed like strangers. "Mom," David said, using his courtroom voice, "we need to talk." I removed my gardening gloves slowly, trying to calm the sudden racing of my heart. What a lovely surprise. All 3 of you visiting at once. They exchanged glances, a silent communication from which I was excluded. Amanda stepped forward, her designer heels sinking slightly into the soft earth of my garden path. "Mom, we've been talking, and we've made a decision." "A decision about what?" Melissa, always the gentlest of my children, took my arm. "Let's go inside, Mom. We can talk over tea." Inside my modest but comfortable home, the same home where I'd raised them, they arranged themselves on my living room furniture like a tribunal. David sat in my late husband's armchair. Amanda perched on the edge of the sofa, and Melissa stood by the fireplace, fingering the framed family photos that chronicled our lives together. "Mom," David began, "we're concerned about you living alone." I folded my hands in my lap. "I've been living alone for 15 years. Since your father passed. I'm managing quite well." Amanda leaned forward. "That's just it, Mom. You think you're managing? But we've noticed things." "What things?" "The house needs repairs," David said. "The gutters are sagging. The back steps are wobbly. You forgot to pay your electric bill last month." "One time," I protested. "I was visiting my sister Vivian in the hospital." It slipped my mind. "And there's your health to consider," Melissa added, her medical training evident in her tone. "Your arthritis is getting worse. What if you fall? What if you need help in the middle of the night?" I looked at their concerned faces and felt a flicker of unease. "What exactly are you suggesting?" David reached into his briefcase and pulled out a glossy brochure. "We found a place called Pennygrove Retirement Community. It's one of the best assisted living facilities in the state." My blood ran cold. "Assisted living? You want to put me in a nursing home?" "Not a nursing home, Mom," Amanda corrected quickly. "A retirement community. There's a big difference." "I'm not moving," I said firmly. "This is my home, Mom." David's voice hardened. "We've already put down a deposit. They have an opening next week." "You did what?" My voice rose with indignation. "Without consulting me?" "We're trying to help you," Melissa said, her eyes pleading. "Pennygrove has everything you need, medical staff on call, activities, people your own age to socialize with." "I have friends," I countered. "I have my garden. I have my art class at the community center." "You'll make new friends," Amanda said dismissively. "And they have gardening clubs and art classes there too." I stood up, my hands trembling with anger. "This is my house, my life. I'm not leaving." David stood as well, towering over me. "Mom, be reasonable. This house is too big for you to maintain. It's eating up your savings. At Pine Grove, everything will be taken care of." "And what about my house? My belongings?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Amanda spoke. "We thought we could sell the house to help cover the costs of Pine Grove. As for your belongings, you can take what fits in your new apartment. I stared at them, these strangers wearing my children's faces. And the rest? We'll divide what you don't need among ourselves, David said. Or donate it. I felt like I'd been slapped. So you've planned it all out, my life, dismantled and redistributed without my consent. Mom, please. Melissa's voice cracked. We're worried about you. We want what's best. I looked at each of them in turn, searching for the children I'd raised to be compassionate, thoughtful human beings. Instead, I saw adults consumed with their own lives, viewing their elderly mother as a problem to be solved. Get out, I said quietly. Mom, David began. Get out of my house. Now. They left, but they didn't give up. Over the next 2 weeks, they returned with reinforcements. A geriatric specialist who assessed me for dementia. I passed with flying colors. A home inspector who cataloged every minor repair my house needed. And finally, a lawyer who explained that while they couldn't force me to move, they could petition for guardianship if they believed I was a danger to myself. The threat hung in the air like a guillotine blade. I knew they would do it. David had the legal connections, Melissa the medical authority, and Amanda the persuasive skills to convince a judge that I was incompetent. I was trapped, and they knew it. And so, on a rainy Monday morning, I surrendered. I signed the papers, packed 2 suitcases of clothing and a box of personal items, and allowed them to drive me to Pine Grove Retirement Community, an imposing brick building surrounded by manicured lawns and decorative fountains that couldn't quite disguise its institutional nature. As we walked through the automatic doors, the smell hit me first. Disinfectant masking the underlying scent of decay and processed food. The lobby was designed to resemble a hotel, with potted plants and comfortable seating, but the residents slumped in wheelchairs, and the staff rushing about with medication carts shattered the illusion. The director, a thin woman named Ms. Winters, greeted us with practiced warmth. Welcome to Pine Grove, Mrs. Holloway. We're so pleased to have you join our family. Family. The word was like ashes in my mouth. My apartment turned out to be a single room with a hospital bed, a dresser, a small bathroom, and a window overlooking the parking lot. No kitchen, no privacy, no garden. My life reduced to 300 square feet of beige walls and institutional furniture. David, Amanda, and Melissa helped me unpack, chattering with forced cheerfulness about the activities calendar and the dining options. Then, with a flurry of quick hugs and promises to visit soon, they were gone, leaving me alone in a strange room in a strange place, surrounded by strangers. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands folded in my lap, and allowed myself exactly 10 minutes to cry. 10 minutes to mourn my home, my independence, my dignity. Then I dried my eyes, straightened my spine, and began to plan. Because there was something my children didn't know, something that would change everything. My sister Vivian had died 3 weeks ago, leaving me her entire estate, $9 million and a portfolio of investments that generated substantial income. I hadn't told my children about the inheritance. Vivian, who never married or had children of her own, had always been wary of my kids. They're too focused on themselves, she'd warned me. They see you as a resource, not a person. I defended them, of course, but now, sitting in this sterile room with the sound of a medication cart rattling down the hallway, I wondered if Vivian had seen something I'd been blind to. Little did my children know that the meat-compliant mother they'd deposited at Pine Grove was about to show them exactly what happens when you underestimate a grandmother. Because I may have lost my home, but I still had my wits, my will, and now, the financial means to teach them a lesson they would never forget. The first week at Pine Grove was a study in routine and restriction. Breakfast at 7:30, medications at 8 hour, scheduled activities at 10 hour, lunch at noon, more activities at 2 hour, dinner at 5:30, and then the long evening hours stretching emptily until lights out at 9. The food was bland, the activities infantilizing, and the staff, though generally kind, overworked and harried. I met my fellow residents, gradually. Dorothy Bennett in the room next to mine had been a concert pianist until arthritis gnarled her fingers. Now she sat by the window for hours, watching the parking lot for her daughter's car. A daughter who visited perhaps once a month. Frank Geller across the hall had been a high school principal. Now he was confined to a wheelchair after a stroke. His speech slurred but his mind still sharp as a tack. Esther Kim down the hall had fled North Korea as a child, built a successful restaurant chain in America, and now sat alone in her room, surrounded by photos of children and grandchildren who were too busy to visit. We were the forgotten ones, the inconvenient elderly, warehoused and waiting to die. My children's visits followed a predictable pattern. David came once, exactly 1 week after dropping me off. He stayed precisely 35 minutes, most of which he spent on his phone dealing with some legal emergency. Amanda called twice but didn't visit at all, explaining that she was swamped with a new marketing campaign. Melissa came twice, bringing flowers and chatting nervously about her children's activities, careful to avoid any mention of my house or belongings. While they went about their busy lives, I began gathering information. I learned that Pengrove was owned by a corporation called Evergreen Senior Care, which operated 12 similar facilities across 3 states. The company was publicly traded, with quarterly profit expectations that dictated staffing levels, food quality, and maintenance schedules. Pengrove itself was profitable but struggling with high staff turnover and increasing costs. I also observed the visiting patterns of families. Sundays were busiest, with perhaps 30% of residents receiving visitors. During the week, that number dropped to less than 10%. Most visits lasted under an hour and had the distinct flavor of obligation rather than connection. During my 3rd week at Pinegrove, I requested permission to use the computer in the community room. Miss Winters seemed surprised, but granted approval. "Looking up recipes, Mrs. Holloway?" she asked condescendingly. "Something like that," I replied with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Once alone with the computer, I accessed my email and sent a message to Gregory Morgan, Vivian's attorney, and the executor of her estate. We arranged to meet the following day during what I told the staff would be a doctor's appointment. Gregory picked me up in his sleek black sedan, his eyebrows rising slightly at the sight of Pinegrove. "This is where your children placed you?" he asked as I buckled my seatbelt. "This is it," I confirmed. "And they're unaware of your inheritance?" "Completely. Vivian insisted her will remain private. Only you and I know the extent of what she left me." He nodded thoughtfully as he pulled away from the curb. "And what exactly can I help you with today, Mrs. Holloway?" I turned to him, my jaw set with determination. "I want to buy Pinegrove." Gregory nearly swerved off the road. "You want to what?" "Buy Pinegrove, the entire facility." He regained his composure. "May I ask why?" "Let's just say I want to make some improvements to the visiting policies." What I didn't tell Gregory was that every night, as I lay in my narrow bed listening to Dorothy crying softly for her daughter in the next room, my resolve hardened. This wasn't just about me and my children anymore. It was about all of us, all the parents who had been discarded, all the families who had forgotten what truly mattered. I was going to change that, one visiting hour at a time. Gregory was skeptical but thorough. Over the next month, he discreetly investigated Evergreen Senior Care's financial situation, eventually discovering that the company was over-leveraged and looking to divest some of its less profitable facilities, including Pinegrove. "They're asking $14 million, he reported during one of our clandestine meetings at a coffee shop near Pinegrove. "Offer them $7 million, I countered. "Cash, immediate closing, no contingencies." Gregory's eyebrows shot up again. "That's extremely aggressive, Mrs. Holloway." "Trust me, they'll take it." And they did. Evergreen Senior Care, facing pressure from shareholders and carrying too much debt, agreed to sell Pinegrove for $7.5 million in a deal that closed with remarkable speed. Through a series of holding companies and trusts that Gregory established, I became the owner of Pine Grove without anyone, especially my children, knowing. The day after the sale was finalized, I requested a meeting with Martha Reynolds, the facility's administrator. She entered my room with obvious reluctance, clearly expecting complaints about the food or activities. "Mrs. Holloway," she said, settling into the single visitor's chair. "How can I help you today?" I studied her for a moment. Martha was in her late 40s, with stress lines around her eyes, and the harried look of someone perpetually putting out fires. But there was intelligence in her gaze, and I suspected a genuine concern for the residents that corporate policies had gradually smothered. "Miss Reynolds," I began, "what would you change about Pine Grove if you could?" She blinked, caught off guard by the question. "I'm not sure what you mean. If money were no object, if you could run this place the way you wanted to, what would you do differently?" A flicker of passion crossed her face before professional caution reasserted itself. "Mrs. Holloway, I appreciate your interest, but Pine Grove is operated according to Evergreen Senior Care's established protocols, and Evergreen Senior Care no longer owns Pine Grove." I interrupted. Martha froze. "I'm sorry? The sale was finalized yesterday." I handed her a business card, Gregory's, and watched understanding dawn in her eyes. "You're the new owner?" I nodded. "But how? Why?" "The how is complicated. The why." I leaned forward. "I want to make some changes." Over the next hour, Martha's initial shock gave way to cautious enthusiasm as I outlined my vision for Pine Grove. More staff, better pay, improved meals, renovated facilities, and most importantly, a new approach to family involvement. "You want to restrict visiting hours for families who don't visit regularly?" Martha asked, her brow furrowing. "Not restrict exactly. Incentivize. Families who visit at least twice a week will have unlimited access. Those who visit less frequently will be limited to Sundays between 2 and 4. That's unusual. So is abandoning your parent in a facility and then forgetting about them?" Martha was quiet for a moment, thinking. "The families won't like it." "No, they won't," I agreed. "But the residents will. And ultimately, this is their home, not a convenience for their children." After our meeting, Martha left to draft a letter to all families explaining the ownership change and the new visiting policy. Meanwhile, I sat by my window, watching the parking lot, wondering how long it would take for my own children to react. I didn't have to wait long. David arrived the very next day, striding through the front doors like he owned the place, waving a copy of Martha's letter like a weapon. He didn't even stop at the front desk, heading straight for my room with the confident assumption that rules didn't apply to him. "Mom," he burst in without knocking. "What is this nonsense about restricted visiting hours?" I looked up from my book calmly. "Hello, David. It's nice to see you too." He thrust the letter at me. "Did you know about this? The new owners are implementing some ridiculous policy about limiting visits to Sundays if you don't come twice a week. It's outrageous." "Is it?" I asked mildly. "When was the last time you visited, David?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. "I've been swamped with the Anderson case. You know how it is." "Indeed. How inconvenient it must be to have to schedule time to see your mother." A flash of irritation crossed his face. "That's not fair. I'm trying to build a case that could make partner. And I'm trying to adjust to the life you and your siblings decided was best for me." I set my book aside. "Why does this policy bother you, David? You rarely visit anyway." "It's the principle of the thing. They can't dictate when I see my own mother." "Actually, they can. It's private property." David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was frustrated. "Who are these new owners anyway?" The letter was vague. I shrugged. "I wouldn't know. I'm just a resident." As he paced my small room, ranting about legal remedies and possible violations of family rights, I watched him with new eyes. This successful, confident man had once been a little boy who ran to me with skinned knees and broken toys, trusting me to fix everything. When had he stopped seeing me as a person and started viewing me as a problem to manage? Mom, are you listening to me? David's voice broke through my thoughts. Yes, dear. You were saying something about filing a complaint? I think we should. And we should talk to other families too. There's strength in numbers. I nodded thoughtfully. You do what you think is best, David. He left shortly after, muttering about calling Amanda and Melissa to formulate a strategy. I watched him stride across the parking lot to his expensive car, phone already pressed to his ear. Little did he know that the new owner he was planning to confront was sitting right there in room 217, watching his hasty departure with a mixture of sadness and determination. My children had taken away my home, my independence, my dignity, but they had overlooked one crucial fact: I was still their mother, and I still had a few lessons left to teach them. The next morning, Martha appeared at my door with a thin smile. Mrs. Holloway, you have visitors. All three of your children are waiting in the conference room. My heart quickened, but I kept my expression neutral. Thank you, Martha. I'll be right there. I took my time getting ready, smoothing my silver hair and applying a touch of lipstick. The woman in the mirror looked stronger than I felt, her spine straight despite the weight of years and disappointment. When I entered the conference room, David, Amanda, and Melissa were huddled together, whispering intensely. They straightened as I appeared, their faces set with determination. Mom, David began, using his lawyer voice again. We need to talk about these new visiting policies. Hello to you too, I said mildly, taking a seat across from them. What brings all three of my children to visit on the same day? It must be a special occasion. Amanda leaned forward, her marketing expertise evident in her persuasive tone. Mom, we're concerned about these changes. The new owners seem to have implemented policies that could restrict our ability to see you. Only if you visit less than twice a week, I pointed out. That's unreasonable, David argued. We all have demanding careers, families, responsibilities more important than your mother, I finished for him. Melissa, always the most sensitive of my children, flinched. Mom, that's not fair. We care about you. We just can't drop everything twice a week. Can't or won't? I asked quietly. An uncomfortable silence fell. Finally, Amanda spoke, her voice hardening. We've talked to other families. They're upset too. Some are considering moving their parents to different facilities. I see. And would you move me if the policy doesn't change? My children exchanged glances. We've looked into some options, David admitted. There's a place called Sunnyvale, about 20 minutes further away. Similar services, no restrictive visiting policies. I nodded slowly, absorbing the fact that they were planning to uproot me again rather than adjust their schedules to include more regular visits. And what about what I want? Does that factor into your decision at all? Melissa reached for my hand. Of course it does, Mom. We want you to be happy. Happy? I repeated. Was I happy when you sold my house without my consent? When you divided my belongings among yourselves? When you placed me in this facility despite my objections? David shifted uncomfortably. Mom, we've been through this. It was for your own good. My own good, I echoed. And these new policies aren't for my good? Having my children visit me regularly instead of when it's convenient for them? Amanda's expression hardened. That's different. We're busy, Mom. We can't just what? Spare an hour twice a week for the woman who raised you? The woman who worked double shifts to put you through college? The woman who sat by your hospital bed for 3 days when you had your appendix out, Amanda? Silence fell again, heavier this time. We're trying, Mom, Melissa said softly. We really are. Are you? I looked at each of them in turn, because from where I sit, it seems like you're trying to solve a problem, not connect with your mother. David stood abruptly. This isn't productive. We need to speak with the new owners directly. Do you know how to reach them? A slow smile spread across my face. As a matter of fact, I do. They stared at me expectantly. You're looking at her. 3 pairs of eyes widened in shock. What are you talking about, Mom? Amanda demanded. I own Pinegrove now. I purchased it from Evergreen Senior Care last month. Their expressions would have been comical under different circumstances. David's jaw literally dropped. Amanda froze mid-gesture, and Melissa made a small, strangled sound of disbelief. "That's impossible," David finally managed. "How could you possibly afford to buy a nursing home? Vivian left me everything when she died. $9 million, plus investments." "Aunt Vivian?" Melissa whispered. "But you never said." "You never asked," I countered. "You were too busy deciding what was best for me to inquire about my financial situation." $9 million, Amanda repeated numbly. "And you used it to buy this place?" "I had some left over," I said calmly. "Enough to implement all the improvements I've planned." "Improvements like restricting our visiting hours," David said, his lawyer brain finally catching up. "Incentivizing regular visits," I corrected. "Encouraging families to remember that their elderly relatives are people, not problems to be managed from a distance." They stared at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as their elderly mother who needed their protection, but as a woman with agency, resources, and a determination they had severely underestimated. "Why didn't you tell us about the inheritance?" Amanda asked finally. "Would it have changed your decision to place me here?" They exchanged glances again, and I had my answer. "This is unbelievable," David muttered. "You've been planning this all along." "No, David. I've been reacting to the situation you three created. You took away my home, my independence, my dignity. You treated me like a child incapable of making her own decisions. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Melissa was crying now, silent tears sliding down her cheeks. "Mom, we thought we were helping you. Did you? Or were you helping yourselves to a more convenient arrangement?" None of them answered. I stood up, straightening my cardigan. "The new visiting policy stands. Visit twice a week, and you'll have unlimited access. Visit less frequently, and you'll be restricted to Sunday afternoons. Your choice." "This is manipulation," David accused. "No, David, this is consequences. For perhaps the first time in your adult lives, your treatment of your mother has real, tangible consequences." I walked to the door, then paused, looking back at their stunned faces. "Oh, and Martha has scheduled a meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. to discuss the facility improvements with the staff. As the owner, I'll be attending. You're welcome to join us, if you'd like to see what your mother is capable of." I left them sitting there, shock still evident in their expressions, and made my way back to my room. My hands were trembling, my heart racing, with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. I hadn't wanted it to come to this. I hadn't wanted to force my children to visit me, to use power and policy to engineer connection. But as I looked out my window at the parking lot, where Dorothy still watched daily for her daughter's car, as I thought of Frank, whose son promised to visit but rarely did, as I remembered Esther's tears when her grandchildren canceled yet another visit, I knew I was doing the right thing, not just for me, but for all of us. All the forgotten parents, who deserved better than occasional visits, squeezed between more important obligations. My children had taught me a harsh lesson about family priorities. Now it was my turn to teach them one about respect, about consequences, about remembering what truly matters before it's too late. And I was just getting started. Because this was no longer just about my family. It was about creating a community where elderly people weren't warehoused and forgotten, but valued, included, and most importantly, visited. It was about reminding children everywhere that parents don't stop needing love and connection just because they've grown old. It was about changing the conversation around aging and family responsibility, one restricted visiting hour at a time. The next morning, I awoke feeling lighter than I had in months. The secret was out. The power dynamic had shifted. Whatever happened next, I was no longer the victim of my children's decisions. I was the architect of my own destiny. I dressed carefully for the staff meeting, choosing a blue dress that had always brought me compliments. As I fastened my pearl earrings, one of the few pieces of jewelry I'd managed to keep, when my children divided my belongings, I caught sight of my reflection in the small bathroom mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different somehow. Stronger, more determined, less willing to be dismissed. Martha was waiting outside my door, a thick folder clutched to her chest, her expression a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "Mrs. Holloway," she greeted me. "Are you ready for the meeting?" "More than ready," I replied. "And please, call me Ruth." "Ruth?" She smiled tentatively. "The staff is, well, they're curious. Rumors have been circulating since the ownership change was announced. I imagine they have. Let's not keep them waiting." The conference room was packed with staff members, nurses, aides, kitchen workers, maintenance personnel. They fell silent as Martha and I entered, eyes widening as they recognized me. I'd made a point of learning everyone's names during my time at Pine Grove, greeting them warmly each day, asking about their families, listening to their challenges. Now they stared at me with new understanding, whispering to each other behind raised hands. "Good morning, everyone," Martha began. "As you know, Pine Grove was recently acquired from Evergreen Senior Care. Today, I'd like to introduce you to our new owner, Mrs. Ruth Holloway." A murmur swept through the room as I stepped forward. "Yes, I'm a resident here," I acknowledged, addressing the unspoken question. "And now I own the place." I realize that's unusual, but I assure you it's all perfectly legal. A hesitant laugh rippled through the audience. "I became a resident here under protest," I continued. "My children decided I couldn't manage on my own anymore, and placed me here against my wishes. I'm sure many of you have heard similar stories from other residents." Nods of recognition, especially from the nursing staff who heard residents' confidences daily. What my children didn't know was that I had recently inherited a substantial sum from my sister. When I saw the conditions here, not through any fault of yours, but because of corporate policies that prioritized profit over care, I decided to do something about it. I paused, surveying the room. "You are all overworked and underpaid. The facility is understaffed and under-resourced. The residents are often lonely and neglected by families who visit when it's convenient, not when it's needed. Starting today, all of that changes." The energy in the room shifted, skepticism giving way to cautious hope. "First, everyone is getting a raise." I outlined the new pay scale, which represented a 20–30% increase for most positions. "Second, we're hiring additional staff in every department to ensure appropriate coverage. Third, we're renovating the facility, starting with the common areas and resident rooms." The excitement was palpable now, staff members exchanging glances and smiles. "But perhaps most importantly, we're implementing a new visiting policy for families." I explained the 2-visit minimum for unlimited access, the Sunday-only hours for less frequent visitors. "We're going to remind families that their elderly relatives aren't storage items to be checked on occasionally. They're people who need consistent love and connection." A nurse in the front row, Maria, who had always been particularly kind to me, raised her hand. "Mrs. Holloway, what about families who live far away? Some of our residents have children in other states." "Excellent question, Maria. We'll make reasonable accommodations for geographic distance. Video calls can count as visits if properly scheduled and of sufficient duration. The point isn't to punish families who genuinely can't visit often. It's to change the mindset of those who could but choose not to." Just as I was about to continue, the conference room door opened, and my 3 children walked in. They hesitated as all eyes turned to them, clearly uncomfortable being the center of attention. "Ah, my children have decided to join us," I said smoothly. "David, Amanda, Melissa, please find seats. We're discussing the improvements we'll be making to Pine Grove." They shuffled to empty chairs at the back of the room, and I continued outlining my vision for a transformed Pine Grove. Not just a place where elderly people waited to die, but a community where they continued to grow, connect, and thrive. After the meeting, Martha stayed to answer staff questions while I approached my children. "What did you think?" I asked. They exchanged glances, a habit that had become increasingly irritating. "It sounds expensive," David said finally. Of course, that would be his first concern. I can afford it, Mom, Amanda began, her marketing brain visibly working. Have you considered the potential liability issues with some of these programs? The transportation for resident outings? The community garden with tools? Yes, Amanda. We'll have appropriate insurance and supervision. Melissa, who had been quiet, finally spoke. The staff seemed happy. They should be. Most of them have been working too hard for too little for too long. An awkward silence fell. Finally, David cleared his throat. About this visiting policy, it stands, I said firmly. Mom, we want to see you, Melissa said softly. We really do. But twice a week is just what? Too much effort? Too great a sacrifice of your precious time? That's not fair, Amanda protested. We have jobs, kids, responsibilities, and I have spent my entire adult life putting your needs before my own, I countered. I missed vacations to pay for your summer camps. I drove a used car so you could have music lessons and sports equipment. I worked nights so I could be home when you got back from school. Now I'm asking for 2 hours of your time each week. Is that really so much? None of them had an answer. They made excuses and left shortly after, promising to figure something out about the visiting schedule. I watched them go, feeling a mixture of sadness and resolve. I'd thrown down the gauntlet. Now it was up to them to respond. Over the next few weeks, Pine Grove began to transform. The renovation started with the common areas. Fresh paint, new furniture, better lighting. The dining room was expanded, and the kitchen staff, bolstered by new hires and better equipment, began preparing meals that residents actually looked forward to. The activity calendar expanded dramatically, offering everything from art classes to guest lectures to outings to local cultural events. But the most significant change was in the atmosphere. Staff members, no longer exhausted and resentful, had time to chat with residents, to listen to their stories, to treat them as individuals rather than tasks to be completed. Residents, feeling the shift, began emerging from their rooms more, participating in activities, forming friendships, rediscovering interests they'd abandoned. And families started visiting more frequently. Not all of them, of course. Some complained bitterly about the new policy, threatening to move their relatives elsewhere. I invited them to do so if they found our emphasis on regular family connection too burdensome. A few actually did transfer their family members, but most, faced with the reality that other facilities might be further away or more expensive, grudgingly adjusted their schedules. Dorothy's daughter, who had previously visited once a month at most, now came every Wednesday and Sunday, bringing her children along. Frank's son, initially resistant, discovered that his father was a repository of wisdom about educational administration that actually helped with his own career challenges. Esther's children established a rotation so that one of them visited at least twice a week, often bringing her beloved grandchildren. My own children's responses varied. David, predictably, tested the boundaries, attempting to visit outside the restricted Sunday hours, and becoming indignant when politely turned away. I'm her son, he protested to the receptionist, who calmly explained the policy. Amanda tried a different approach, sending expensive flower arrangements and gift baskets instead of visiting in person. I donated them to the common areas, where all residents could enjoy them. Melissa, to my surprise, was the first to adapt. She began visiting every Tuesday and Saturday afternoon, bringing her children along occasionally. The visits were awkward at first, filled with forced conversation and frequent glances at her watch. But gradually, as she witnessed the changes happening at Pine Grove, her interest seemed to become more genuine. The place looks different, she commented during her third Tuesday visit. Brighter, somehow. New paint, better lighting, I explained, and happier residents. She watched as Frank wheeled past, deep in conversation with a new resident about educational theory. I've never seen so many people in the common areas before. That's because we've given them a reason to come out of their rooms. Melissa hesitated, then asked, Mom, why didn't you tell us about Aunt Vivian's inheritance? I considered the question carefully. Would you have listened if I had? Or would you have assumed I couldn't manage it on my own and taken control of that too? Her flinch told me I'd hit the mark. I don't think we really saw you, she admitted softly. We saw a problem to solve, not, she gestured vaguely. Not a person with agency, dreams, capabilities? I suggested. Yes, she looked down at her hands. I'm a doctor. I should have known better. I see how the elderly are infantilized in the healthcare system all the time. And then I did the same thing to my own mother. It was the first genuine acknowledgement from any of my children that they had treated me poorly. I reached over and took her hand. You're here now, I said. That's a start. The next milestone came when David finally surrendered to the visiting policy and began coming regularly on Wednesday evenings and Sunday afternoons. He arrived with his laptop the first few times, attempting to work through our visits, but I implemented a strict no work during visits rule that applied to all families. Mom, I have deadlines, he protested when Martha gently but firmly asked him to put away his computer. And I have limited time left on this earth, I countered. Which is more important? He had no answer for that. Amanda was the last holdout. She visited only on Sundays, precisely at 2 p.m., staying exactly until 4 p.m., making it clear that she was fulfilling an obligation rather than seeking connection. During one such visit, as she checked her watch for the third time in 20 minutes, I finally lost patience. Am I boring you, Amanda? I asked quietly. She looked startled. No, of course not. I just have a dinner reservation at 6. 2 hours from now. I need to get home and change first. I studied my middle child. Always the most driven, the most achievement-oriented of the three. Amanda, why do you find it so difficult to simply be present with me? I am present, she protested. I'm here, aren't I? Your body is here? Your mind is already at dinner? She sighed, exasperated. What do you want from me, Mom? I'm visiting twice a week like you demanded. I'm following your rules. I want my daughter back, I said simply. The one who used to tell me about her dreams and fears. The one who once spent an entire Saturday helping me plant tulip bulbs just so we could talk about the boy she liked. The one who saw me as a person, not an obligation. Amanda's expression softened slightly. That was a long time ago, Mom. Yes, I agreed. Too long. She left at exactly 4 p.m., as usual. But something in our conversation must have touched her, because the following Wednesday, she showed up unexpectedly, without her phone in hand. I thought we could play Scrabble, she said, producing a travel version of the game we'd enjoyed when she was younger. If you're not busy, I wasn't busy. And for the first time in years, neither was she. As my children's visits became more regular, I began to notice subtle changes in our interactions. The conversations became less superficial, more meaningful. They started asking questions about my life, my thoughts, my memories, questions they hadn't bothered to ask in years. They began to see me again. But the most significant transformation occurred during a family dinner I hosted in my newly renovated apartment at Pine Grove, now expanded to include a small kitchenette and dining area. I'd prepared a simple meal, nothing fancy, but made with my own hands in my own space. As we sat around the table, David raised his glass in a toast. To Mom, who taught us all a valuable lesson about underestimating the elderly. We laughed, but there was truth beneath the humor. I want to say something, Melissa said, her expression serious. When we moved you here, Mom, we thought we were doing what was best for you. But looking back, I can see that we were really doing what was most convenient for us. Amanda nodded slowly. We told ourselves it was about your safety, your well-being, but we never really asked what you wanted. And when you pushed back, David added, we used our professional authority, my legal knowledge, Melissa's medical training, Amanda's persuasive skills, to override your objections. That wasn't right. No, I agreed, it wasn't. I'm sorry, Mom, Melissa said, tears welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry we took away your home, your independence, your dignity. We were wrong, Amanda admitted. reaching for my hand across the table. And not just about you, about everything. I felt my own tears threatening. I didn't buy this place just to punish you, I said. I did it because I saw a broken system. Not just in how Pine Grove was run, but in how we as a society treat our elderly. We warehouse them, visit when it's convenient, and tell ourselves we're doing the right thing. David's expression was thoughtful. You know, there's probably a case to be made for broader policy changes in elder care. Regulatory reforms that would. David, Amanda interrupted with a smile. Not everything needs a legal solution. He laughed, acknowledging the gentle rebuke. Fair enough, but Mom's onto something important here. The visiting policy has actually changed how families interact with residents. I've noticed it myself when I come in. The nurses tell me that residents' depression rates are down, Melissa added. And there are fewer calls for anti-anxiety medications, because they're not being forgotten, I said simply. We talked late into the evening, longer than any conversation we'd had in years. As they prepared to leave, each of my children hugged me, not the perfunctory embraces I'd grown accustomed to, but real hugs, full of emotion and connection. We'll see you Saturday, Mom, David said, and for once, I actually believed him. After they left, I sat in my apartment, reflecting on the journey that had brought us to this point. It had taken drastic measures, buying a nursing home, implementing controversial policies, forcing my children to confront their neglect, to repair what had been broken in our family. But as I looked around at my transformed living space, at the facility that was becoming a true community, at the changes rippling outward from my small act of rebellion, I knew it had been worth it. Dorothy no longer sat by her window watching for her daughter's car. Instead, she was teaching piano again to a small group of local children who came to Pine Grove for lessons twice a week. Frank had started a mentoring program for new school administrators, sharing his decades of wisdom with those just beginning their careers. Esther was teaching Korean cooking classes in our newly expanded kitchen, her family often joining to assist and learn alongside residents. Families who had initially resisted the visiting policy were now among its strongest advocates, discovering that regular connection with their elderly relatives enriched their own lives in unexpected ways. Staff members, fairly compensated and properly supported, brought creativity and compassion to their work, rather than exhaustion and resentment. And my own children? They were learning, slowly but surely, to see me as I truly was. Not an inconvenient responsibility, not a problem to be managed, but a whole person, with value, wisdom, and yes, still some fight left in her. The golden years, I was discovering, didn't have to be about quiet resignation to diminishment and loss. They could be about transformation, about reclaiming power, about teaching the younger generations what truly matters before it's too late. My rebellion had started as a personal crusade for dignity and respect. It had become something much larger, a model for reimagining how we care for our elderly, how we maintain family connections across generations, how we honor the final chapters of a life well lived. As I prepared for bed that night, I smiled at the thought of what Vivian would say if she could see what I'd done with her inheritance. She'd been right about my children's tendency to prioritize their own convenience, but she hadn't anticipated my capacity for creative revenge or the healing that could come from it. Tomorrow would bring another day of meetings, renovations, policy refinements. More families would visit, some grudgingly at first, then with increasing engagement as they rediscovered the parents they'd been too busy to truly see. More residents would emerge from isolation, finding community and purpose where they'd expected only waiting and loneliness. And I, Ruth Holloway, once discarded and forgotten in room 217, would continue my quiet revolution, proving that even the oldest among us can create change, demand respect, and occasionally, teach the younger generations a lesson they'll never forget. Because grandmothers may be gentle, but cross us at your peril. We've lived too long, loved too deeply, and fought too hard to be dismissed, and we're not done yet. Not by a long shot. 6 months after buying Pine Grove, I hosted an open house to showcase the transformed facility. The renovations were complete, the expanded staff was fully trained, and the new programs were flourishing. Families, healthcare professionals, and representatives from other senior living facilities toured the grounds, expressing amazement at the changes. "It's like a different place," one visitor commented, watching residents and family members working together in the community garden. "It is a different place," I agreed, "because we have a different philosophy." That philosophy, prioritizing dignity, connection, and purpose, had transformed Pinegrove from an institutional warehouse to a vibrant community. The dining room now resembled a restaurant more than a cafeteria, with tablecloths, fresh flowers, and a menu that changed daily. The activity calendar was so full that residents had to pick and choose which events to attend. The staff, once overwhelmed and undertrained, now participated in regular professional development and received competitive compensation. But the most remarkable change was in the residents themselves. People who had once spent their days isolated in their rooms were now teaching classes, mentoring young people, creating art, tending gardens, participating in community outreach. They were living, not just existing. My children had become integral to this transformation. David, putting his legal expertise to good use, had reviewed and revised all of Pinegrove's policies to ensure they protected residents' rights, while encouraging family involvement. Amanda had developed a marketing campaign to share our model with other facilities, creating materials that emphasized the benefits of regular family connection for both residents and their relatives. Melissa had established a wellness program that addressed not just physical health but emotional and social well-being. During the open house, I noticed a woman studying our visiting policy chart with particular interest. She turned as I approached, revealing a face lined with care and intelligence. "Mrs. Holloway? I'm Dr. Patricia Winters, from the State Department of Elder Affairs. I've been hearing remarkable things about what you're doing here." We chatted about the changes at Pinegrove, and she shared her own concerns about the elder care system. "The problem is systemic," she said. "Most facilities are underfunded, understaffed, and driven by profit margins rather than quality of care. Not all of us have $9 million to change things," I acknowledged with a smile. "No, but your model could be adapted. The visiting policy alone." She gestured to the chart. "Our data shows that regular family connection is one of the strongest predictors of well-being in elderly populations, yet most facilities do nothing to encourage it. They're afraid of alienating families," I said. "Who pay the bills?" She finished my thought. "But what if the government incentivized family involvement, tax credits for family caregivers, subsidies for facilities that implement policies like yours, community programs that bridge the gap between generations?" Our conversation continued over lunch, and by the end, Dr. Winters had invited me to speak at a state conference on elder care reform. "Your perspective as both a resident and an owner is unique. Policymakers need to hear from someone who's experienced the system from both sides." That invitation led to others, and soon I found myself becoming an unlikely advocate for elder care reform. I spoke at conferences, consulted with facility owners, met with legislators. My children accompanied me to these events, adding their professional expertise to my experiential knowledge. Together we were challenging the accepted norms of how society treats its elderly members. Not everyone embraced our message, of course. Some facility owners saw our emphasis on family involvement as unrealistic or financially risky. Some families resented the implication that they weren't doing enough for their elderly relatives. Some policymakers balked at the cost of meaningful reform. But others listened. Other facilities began implementing modified versions of our visiting policy, tailored to their specific circumstances, but maintaining the core principle that regular family connection should be expected, not optional. Other families began reconsidering their priorities, finding ways to incorporate regular visits into their busy schedules. Other policymakers began exploring regulatory changes that would support better care and stronger family involvement. A year after my children had placed me in Pine Grove against my will, I stood at a podium addressing a national conference on elder care, my children seated proudly in the front row. The crisis in elder care isn't just about funding, staffing, or medical practices, I told the audience. It's about connection. It's about remembering that the elderly aren't a problem to be solved, but people to be valued. It's about recognizing that convenience isn't more important than family. I paused, looking out at the sea of faces. My children placed me in a care facility because they were too busy to visit, too busy to help, too busy to consider what I actually wanted. They're not bad people. They're good people who made choices based on what society told them was acceptable. My gaze found my children, who nodded encouragingly. But it isn't acceptable to warehouse our elderly and visit when it's convenient. It isn't acceptable to prioritize career advancement over family connection. It isn't acceptable to treat the final chapters of a person's life as less important than the middle ones. The room was silent, attentive. I had the unusual opportunity to change this narrative, to show that another way is possible. Most elderly don't have the resources I had. They can't buy their care facilities and implement new policies. They can't force their children to visit through institutional rules. They can only wait, hope, and too often, despair. I gestured to the data displayed on the screen behind me. Statistics showing improved health outcomes, reduced depression rates, and decreased medication usage among Pine Grove residents since implementing our visiting policy. Regular family connection isn't just nice, it's necessary, it's healthcare, it's dignity, it's the least we can do for those who gave us life, raised us, sacrificed for us. As I concluded my speech, I could see both tears and determination in many eyes. Change was possible. It was happening, slowly but surely, one facility, one family, one policy at a time. Afterward, as we mingled with conference attendees, David put his arm around my shoulders. You know, Mom, when we placed you in Pine Grove, we thought we were solving a problem. You never imagined you'd end up leading a national conversation on elder care reform. Life is full of surprises, I replied. Especially when you underestimate a grandmother. Amanda laughed. We definitely won't make that mistake again. You know what the real irony is? Melissa mused. If we hadn't placed you in Pine Grove against your will, none of this would have happened. Your experience as a resident gave you insights no outside reformer could have had. So in a way, David added, our mistake led to something important. It did, I agreed. But let's be clear, I would still rather have stayed in my own home. They had the grace to look sheepish. However, I continued, I'm grateful for where we've ended up. Not just the changes at Pine Grove or the policy reforms we're advocating for, but this. I gestured to the four of us, standing together. Us finding our way back to being a real family again. That evening, back at Pine Grove, I hosted a small celebration in my apartment. My children were there, along with Dorothy, Frank, Esther, Martha, and several other residents and staff members who had become dear friends during this journey. As we shared food, stories, and laughter, I looked around at these people who had become my community, my purpose, my new family in addition to my biological one. Each of them had been transformed by the changes at Pine Grove. Dorothy from a lonely woman watching for her daughter's car, to a vibrant piano teacher, sharing her gift with a new generation. Frank from an isolated former principal to a valued mentor, imparting his wisdom. Esther from a forgotten grandmother, to the heart of our intercultural cooking program. And my own children, David, Amanda, and Melissa from distant busy professionals, who visited their mother out of obligation to present, engaged family members who had rediscovered the value of connection. As for me, I had transformed too, from a displaced, disregarded elderly woman, to the architect of change, the unlikely revolutionary, the grandmother who refused to be forgotten. The journey hadn't been easy. It had required courage, confrontation, and yes, a bit of creative revenge. It had meant challenging my children's assumptions, society's expectations, and my own internalized ageism that had initially made me doubt my right to demand better treatment. But looking around at the fruits of that journey, the renovated facility, the engaged families, the empowered residents, my own healed relationship with my children, I knew it had been worth every difficult moment. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I stood at my window looking out at the Pine Grove grounds, now beautifully landscaped with gardens, walking paths, and comfortable seating areas where residents and visitors could enjoy each other's company. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new conversations about how we value and care for our elderly. The work wasn't finished, not at Pine Grove, not in my family, not in society at large. But tonight, I could rest in the knowledge that I had turned abandonment into advocacy, isolation into community, and rebellion into reform. I had reminded my children, and perhaps society, that growing old doesn't mean becoming invisible, that family obligations don't end when wrinkles begin, that the wisdom of age deserves not just respect, but active engagement. And I had proven, to myself and others, that even at 78, a grandmother with determination can change not just her own circumstances, but the world around her. Because sometimes, the most powerful force for change isn't youth with its energy, or middle age with its resources, but age with its perspective, its patience, and its absolute refusal to be dismissed. As I turned from the window and prepared for bed, I smiled at the thought of what tomorrow might bring. The Golden Rebellion had only just begun. 18 months after buying Pine Grove, I found myself sitting in a congressional hearing room in Washington, D.C., preparing to testify before a committee on aging about the crisis in elder care and the reforms we'd implemented. My children sat behind me, along with Martha and several Pine Grove residents who had become advocates in their own right. "Mrs. Holloway," the committee chairwoman began, "you've transformed a single facility in ways that have attracted national attention. But critics say your model isn't scalable without the kind of financial resources you personally brought to the table. How do you respond to that?" I leaned toward the microphone. It's true that I had unusual resources at my disposal, but the core principles of our approach don't require millions of dollars. Dignity doesn't cost money. Respect doesn't cost money. Expecting families to maintain meaningful connection with their elderly relatives doesn't cost money. But the staffing increases, the facility renovations, those do cost money, another committee member pointed out. Yes, I acknowledged. And that's where policy comes in. Tax incentives for family caregivers, subsidies for facilities that implement best practices, community partnerships that bring generations together. These are investments, not expenses. They're investments in better health outcomes, reduced medication usage, fewer hospitalizations, and most importantly, in human dignity. The questions continued for nearly 2 hours, ranging from specific policy recommendations to personal inquiries about my journey from displaced resident to facility owner to advocate. Throughout, I emphasized that my story, while unusual, highlighted universal truths about aging, family responsibility, and societal values. The real question, I told the committee in my closing statement, isn't whether we can afford to reform elder care. It's whether we can afford not to. Because the way we treat our elderly reflects who we are, as a society, as families, as human beings, and right now, that reflection should trouble us all. After the hearing, a young staff member approached me in the hallway. "Mrs. Holloway, my grandmother is in a facility much like Pine Grove was before your changes. She's lonely, depressed, and the staff is too overworked to provide real care." Her voice caught. "I visit when I can, but with my job here and 2 young children, it's hard to manage more than once a month." I recognized the genuine anguish in her eyes, the same conflict I'd seen in my own children's faces, the struggle between competing responsibilities and limited time. "What's your grandmother's name?" I asked gently. "Eleanor. Eleanor Martinez." "And what does Eleanor love? What brings her joy?" The young woman looked startled by the question. She was a librarian for 40 years. She loves books, poetry especially, and gardening, though she can't do much of that anymore. Have you asked the facility if they have a reading program or raised beds that would allow her to garden from her wheelchair? No, I haven't. Start there, I suggested. And when you visit, don't just sit and make small talk. Read poetry together. Bring her news about interesting books. Ask about the ones that shaped her. Make each visit meaningful, not just present. Tears welled in her eyes. I never thought about it that way. I've been visiting out of duty, not connection. It's a common pattern, I assured her. But it can change. And when it does, you'll find that those visits enrich your life as much as hers. As she thanked me and walked away, David approached. Another convert to the cause? I smiled. Just a reminder that behind every policy debate are real people trying to figure out how to care for those they love. That evening, we celebrated the successful hearing with dinner at a restaurant near our hotel. As we ate, Amanda raised her glass in a toast. To Mom, who turned abandonment into a movement. To Ruth, Martha added, who showed us that the golden years can be revolutionary years. I accepted their toast with a smile, but my mind was already moving forward. The congressional testimony was just one step in a longer journey. We were developing a certification program for facilities that implemented our visiting policies and quality standards. We were creating resources for families navigating the complexities of elder care. We were building a coalition of advocates, residents, family members, healthcare professionals, policymakers committed to fundamental reform. The work was demanding, especially at my age. There were days when my arthritis flared painfully, when the travel exhausted me, when I questioned whether I had the energy to continue this fight. But then I would remember the Dorothy I had first met at Pine Grove, sitting by her window waiting for a daughter who rarely came. I would think of Frank, brilliant and accomplished, relegated to watching television alone in his room. I would recall Esther's tears when her grandchildren canceled yet another visit, and I would find the strength to continue. My children had become full partners in this work, each contributing their professional expertise and personal insights. More importantly, they had become present in my life again, not just as advocates for elder care reform, but as children who had rediscovered the value of family connection. As our dinner wound down, Melissa checked her watch. We should head back to the hotel. Mom needs her rest before tomorrow's meetings. Actually, I said, I'd like to take a walk first. The night is beautiful, and I've been sitting all day. David looked concerned. Are you sure? It's been a long day. I fixed him with a look that had quelled his objections since childhood. I'm old, David, not fragile. I can manage a short walk. He raised his hands in surrender, laughing. Point taken. We strolled along the National Mall, the monuments illuminated against the night sky. The air was crisp with early autumn, and the paths were relatively quiet at this hour. You know, Amanda said as we walked, when we placed you in Pine Grove, I never imagined we'd end up here walking in Washington after you testified before Congress. Life takes unexpected turns, I agreed. I keep thinking about what might have happened if Aunt Vivian hadn't left you that inheritance, Melissa mused. Would you still be sitting in that room at Pine Grove, waiting for our occasional visits? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable, but important. Probably, I admitted. The inheritance gave me options most elderly don't have. That's why this advocacy work matters so much. Most people can't buy their way out of a broken system. The system itself needs to change. It's changing, David said. Slowly, but it's changing. The certification program is gaining traction. The policy recommendations from today's testimony will influence the upcoming healthcare legislation. The media coverage is raising awareness. And it all started because we were terrible children who abandoned our mother, Amanda added with a wry smile. You weren't terrible, I corrected. You were typical. You did what society told you was acceptable. Place your aging parent in a facility. Visit when convenient. Focus on your own lives. The problem isn't individual families, it's a culture that has normalized neglect of the elderly. We had reached the Lincoln Memorial, its massive columns glowing in the floodlights. We sat on the steps, looking out over the reflecting pool toward the Washington Monument. "I'm proud of you, Mom," Melissa said quietly, "not just for the advocacy work, but for standing up to us, for demanding better, for refusing to be discarded." "I'm proud of us," I replied, "for finding our way back to each other, for using our experience to help others, for remembering what truly matters before it was too late." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the cool night air wrapping around us, the city lights twinkling in the distance. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of peace, not because all problems had been solved or all battles won, but because we were facing them together, as a family should. The next morning, as we prepared for another day of meetings, I received a call from Martha back at Pine Grove. "Ruth," she said, her voice vibrating with excitement, "you won't believe what just happened. The Westlake Group, you know, the company that owns 15 facilities across the state, they want to implement our visiting policy and certification standards in all their locations." I sat down, momentarily overwhelmed by the implications. "That would affect over 2,000 residents," Martha confirmed, "and they want you to consult on the implementation." The ripples were becoming waves. What had started as one grandmother's rebellion against neglect was growing into a movement that could transform thousands of lives. As I shared the news with my children, I saw in their faces the same mixture of amazement and pride. I felt myself. None of us had anticipated this outcome when they'd first driven me to Pine Grove, when I'd sat alone in room 217 planning my small revenge, when we'd confronted each other over the visiting policy. But here we were, 18 months later, at the forefront of a growing movement to reimagine how society cares for its elderly, how families maintain connection across generations, how the golden years can be lived with dignity, purpose, and community. And it had all begun with a simple, powerful truth: that even the oldest among us deserve to be seen, heard, and valued, not as problems to be managed, but as people to be loved. That evening, as we flew home from Washington, I gazed out the airplane window at the patchwork of lights below, each representing communities where elderly people were either treasured or forgotten, either integrated or isolated, either visited or abandoned. There was still so much work to do, so many Dorothys and Franks and Esthers waiting by windows for children who rarely came, but change was happening, conversation by conversation, facility by facility, policy by policy. And I, Ruth Holloway, 79 years old, and just getting started, was right in the middle of it all, leading a golden rebellion that had transformed not just my family, not just Pine Grove, but potentially the very fabric of how America cares for its elderly. Because sometimes, the most revolutionary act is simply to demand the dignity you deserve and then to extend that demand on behalf of all those who cannot make it for themselves. As the plane descended toward home, I smiled at the thought of what tomorrow might bring. The journey continued, the work expanded, the rebellion spread, and I wouldn't have it any other way.